capitalist world of today is a dystopian nightmare. It's a world in which racist police execute black people in the street. The so-called democratic system is reduced to an unaccountable, money-driven, media-orchestrated sham, and species after species is driven to extinction as the rich lay waste to the natural environment for profit, mercilessly exploit women in sweatshops, and bomb countless populations into oblivion. It's a very ugly picture indeed, but today we're going to explore another element, namely how capitalism deprives us of our psychological needs, and in doing so, fucks people up in ways that you probably didn't even think were possible. So sit back, relax with some popcorn, and get ready for another happy, fun-packed video. I'm sorry. It's not going to be a happy, fun-packed video. This is just going to be fucking grim from start to finish, so if I start crying at any point, just go with it, okay? Profit. Glorious profit. Under capitalism, profit is the bottom line. It comes before everything, even the things that we should hold dear. Profit matters more than protecting our environment. Profit matters more than acting in an ethical way. Profit even matters more than the health of the general public. For the capitalist class, the health of the public only matters insofar as it is conducive to economic reproduction. What does that mean? Well, economic reproduction is capitalists making sure they've got everything they need in order for profit making to take place. They need means of production, so factories, farms, offices, machinery that's used to make stuff, etc. They need a market to buy the goods or services that are being produced, and most importantly, they need a workforce that they can employ to operate the means of production, to produce things and to do work for them, basically. Where does health come into this? Well, the capitalists aren't going to be able to make any profit if nobody's able to work for them, and for that reason, the capitalist class do have some economic interest in making sure that a large enough segment of the population is healthy enough to do work for them. However, and this is key, that's as far as it goes. Capitalists do have some economic interest in paying their workers a wage, but only just enough so that they're able to stay alive and go to work each day, make sure they aren't so dissatisfied with their wages that they want to start a revolution, etc. In the same vein, they're interested in keeping you just healthy enough to be able to do the work, but no healthier. Remember, profit is the bottom line, and from a capitalist point of view, any investment into the health and well-being of the population that doesn't contribute to further profit making is a waste of time and resources. And even though capitalists do have an economic interest in keeping workers at the minimum level of health necessary for them to be able to work each day, the condition of being economically exploited has a negative impact on the health and well-being of the workers. So there's a contradiction in the system. Capitalists need us to be healthy enough so that they can exploit us, but the more they exploit us, the unhealthier we will become, and thus not fit for exploitation. Although the physical impacts of economic exploitation should not be disregarded by any means, this video will mainly focus on how capitalist exploitation can affect us on a psychological level. This is how the market makes us sick.
I was looking for a job and then I found a job, and heaven knows I'm miserable now.
Hi-ho, it's home from work we go.
The capitalist workplace is organised in an inherently hierarchical fashion. When the means of production are privately owned, most of us have no choice but to work for a boss in order to access the means of survival, or else scrape by on benefits. This means that we have to spend a large chunk of our waking lives taking orders from people under threat of being fired, and the psychological impact of being bossed around all the time, with no control over your economic situation, is profoundly negative. The Whitehall studies of civil servants working in London found that workers at the bottom of the social ladder had greater concentrations of stress hormones than their counterparts in higher managerial positions. In contrast, a survey carried out by the Anxiety Disorders Association of America in 2006 found that people were far less stressed and anxious when they had more of a say over their own work. But most people who were stressed at work didn't feel comfortable discussing it with their employer. They were worried that it would affect their future opportunities and worried that their boss would see them as being lazy or weak, laugh at them, or not take them seriously. For the minority who didn't feel too intimidated to speak up about their stress at work, only 4 out of 10 were offered some kind of support, usually things like relaxation classes or referral to a mental health professional. But these aren't proper solutions, they're just quick fixes designed to take the problem out of the boss's hands so they don't have to think about it. Anxious at work? Just have a fucking stress ball.
Anyone still experiencing stress at the end of the day will be fired!
And it's unsurprising that people would find the workplace to be a source of anxiety. It can be physically unsafe, especially if you're working in sweatshop conditions, and around 700,000 workers in the UK are hired on zero-hour contracts. These are jobs where, when you go to bed at night, you don't know if you'll still have a job the next morning. Being under constant threat of pay cuts and unemployment is all the more terrifying when you have rent to pay or risk facing eviction. Sleep tight. Capitalism needs unemployment because the threat of being fired serves to scare workers from organising to improve their wages and conditions for fear of losing their jobs. And if you're unemployed in the UK today, the DWP will ensure that you have a manifestly unpleasant experience. Claimants with mental health issues often develop such a fear of being sanctioned that they become too frightened to open the government's brown letters. In my own city, the Edinburgh Coalition Against Poverty run drop-in sessions for claimants, and often find that people with serious mental health issues are under threat of having their only means of economic support stripped away from them. Again, night-night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite. A study published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health found that the DWP's work capability assessments had a detrimental effect on the mental health of claimants. The more people being assessed in a given area, the more antidepressant prescriptions, self-reported mental health issues and suicides. The government has refused to release the data from their own inquiry into the matter and has also refused to allow an independent inquiry to take place. Outside of drug addictions, anxiety disorders are the most prevalent psychiatric illnesses in the United States, with between 11 and 18% of adults having the condition in a given year. But the lack of control people have over their work doesn't just make people feel anxious and stressed. A study by Gallup across 142 countries found that in 2011 to 2012, just 13% of employees said that they felt engaged with their work. 63% said they were not engaged, and 24% said they were actively disengaged. People are likely to feel apathy and a lack of purpose if they don't feel they have ownership over their work.
It's not that I'm lazy, it's that I just don't care.
So, what kind of impact is the capitalist work structure likely to have on your mental health? Well, it gives you a fuckload of things to be frightened about. There's the fact that you don't have control over your own work environment, the fact that bosses can disregard your physical safety for their own private gain, they could cut your pay or fire you at any moment if you commit the heinous crime of being human and making too many mistakes. And if you end up unemployed, you have a precarious source of income doled out by people who are trained to hate you as work-shy and lazy. Any day you could get a brown envelope from the government telling you that your last means of being able to feed yourself is gone.
Does that make you feel stressed? Jay, does it? No? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?
In a nutshell, to answer the question, what kind of impact does the capitalist work structure have on the mental health of the average worker, it's like taking a fucking sledgehammer to a vase. But that's just the workplace. The long list of things to be anxious and depressed about under capitalism also invades other aspects of life, including the places where we eat, sleep and live, creeping in like a foul fucking stench. Let's look at housing. Having a good home environment is hugely important to our well-being. It's supposed to be a safe place where we go to relax and spend time with loved ones, and most of us invest a lot of time and money into making sure we have a reasonable enough place to live. Despite this, not a great deal of research has actually been done looking into the relationship between housing and mental health. However, there was a review done in the Journal of Social Issues in 2003 which looked over existing research and came to a number of conclusions about what people need when it comes to housing. First and most obviously, we need to have a home in the first place. Common mental health problems occur twice as frequently in homeless people than in the non-homeless population. Other studies found that serious mental illnesses, such as major depression, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, had a prevalence of at least a quarter among the homeless population. A census of all homeless men in Tübingen found that 73% had at least one psychiatric disorder, 67% had more than one diagnosis, and 74% had alcohol dependence. Having a place where we can comfortably sleep at night is extremely important to our mental and physical health. The phrase, "no shit Sherlock," comes to mind. Secondly, we need our homes to be of a reasonable quality. A survey of 1,266 adults in the UK found that those whose housing was in a poor state of repair were 4 times as likely to experience depression, isolation and worries than those whose housing was properly maintained. Another survey of over 9,000 adults in the UK found that structural housing problems with damp, leaky roofs and rotting wood were associated with greater rates of mental illness. A survey of 337 black and Latino women in the US found that rat infestation was consistently associated with the poorest mental health. In other words, if the place you live in is rotting, damp, falling to bits and crawling with rodents, that has a negative impact on your mental health. Quelle fucking surprise. So it's important that the home environment is properly maintained. Thirdly, we need to have social support from our neighbours. Studies show that life in high-rise accommodation often engenders feelings of isolation due to lack of social interaction with neighbours, as well as failing to provide adequate play opportunities for children. It's important that we have access to communal gathering spaces so that we can feel part of a community and know that if something goes wrong, our neighbours will be there to support us. Finally, we need security and control over our own environment. We need to know that we're not going to lose our home at any minute. Insecure housing tenure is associated with poorer health, and involuntary displacement and having to frequently move from one place to another has a negative impact on children's emotional and educational development. On the other hand, the opportunity to customise your own space such that it is suited to your own tastes has a positive impact on well-being and self-esteem. So, not only do we have a psychological need for a home, but we also need our homes to be properly maintained, we need to feel safe, we need to feel assured that we won't suddenly lose our home at some point, and we need to have control over our own environment. How effective is the capitalist system in meeting these needs? Well, under capitalism, everything is commodified, and your access to goods and services is always contingent upon how productive you are, and it's no different with housing. The fact that the capitalist system distributes housing in a market fashion means that if you end up homeless, it's incredibly difficult to get out of homelessness, because you're trapped in a cycle of poverty, whereby the condition of being poor means that you stay poor. You need a source of income to pay for somewhere to live, but you can't get a job or benefits if you don't have an address. And by the way, it's not that housing is not available. In the United States, there are 19 million vacant homes. That's enough for every homeless person in America to have 6. Because of this catastrophic mismanagement of resources at the hands of the market system, vast numbers of people will develop psychological problems because their most basic physiological needs for shelter are not being met, when we as a society have the option of meeting those needs multiple times over. The commodification of housing also means that homeless people who squat in empty, disused buildings are criminalised for trespassing on so-called private property. And if homeless people sleep rough, a decision which they have made because the capitalist system has refused to allow them to go anywhere else, they will be harassed by the police. What about if you're renting? Well, in many cases, landlords will seek to maximise their profits by minimising the amount of money they spend on maintenance costs. In this way, they can make money by deliberately allowing the tenants' housing conditions to deteriorate. I have a friend with depression whose flat had a severe bug infestation for 2 years, which the landlord was aware of but never notified her about. She developed a skin condition as a result. Multiple people staying in the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative have said that they were attracted to the co-op because their former landlords didn't seem to care about the maintenance of their homes. The capitalist system gives these slum landlords an opportunity to line their own pockets by disregarding the maintenance of the tenants' homes, and as the studies show, this is to the detriment of the tenants' mental health. On the other hand, there's gentrification, a process by which poorer renters are forced out of their own neighbourhoods by landlords and developers to make way for richer, more profitable tenants. Studies have shown that high rates of involuntary relocation occur in lower income families, and this negatively affects children's well-being and education, as frequently moving from one school to the next makes it harder to form long-lasting friendships. Insecurity of tenure contributes to feelings of anxiety and helplessness. Finally, the organisational structure of capitalist housing is inherently hierarchical. Decisions are made by landlords and bureaucrats for the benefit of said landlords and bureaucrats. When decisions are made from the top down in this manner, people are disempowered and marginalised. It's psychologically healthy for people to have a sense of community and to have control over their own dwellings, but the capitalist system imposes a top-down organisational structure, depriving people of collective self-determination, again to the detriment of their mental health. So, in summary, what are the inherent stressors of capitalist housing? Well, we have a need for a home, and commodified housing, by virtue of its very structure, breeds homelessness. We need our homes to be well maintained, but the prioritisation of profit over maintenance results in poor housing conditions for many people. We need security of tenure, but capitalist housing brings the risk of being priced out and having to involuntarily relocate. We need control over our own living space, as well as a sense of community and social support from our neighbours, but capitalist housing smashes both of these things with layer upon layer of corporate bureaucracy. All of the properties that capitalist housing has, no pun intended, are the exact opposite of what we need psychologically. If, hypothetically, for whatever twisted reason, you were to design an economic system in order to deliberately make people mentally ill, it would look like this. But remember, this is just a fraction of the story. Capitalist housing works in tandem with the drudgery of the capitalist workplace to create an intolerable condition of living. You go to work and line the pockets of bureaucrats who watch over you, set your deadlines and order you around for hours on end, and then you retreat to an isolating environment which, despite the fact that you're the one who lives there, you don't get to make decisions about. For all you know, your landlord could be allowing the place to fall to bits, and all the while you could lose it if your pay is cut, you lose your job or your benefits and end up being priced out. And if you can afford it, you turn on the television and have the luxury of being lectured to by advertisers who, in order to create demand for their largely useless products, will do everything they can to pummel your self-esteem into the ground. They tell you that your physical appearance is inadequate and hammer you with unattainable beauty standards of the ideal man and woman. They tell you that your peers will think less of you unless you appear successful, and they bludgeon you with the idea that the highest want in life is to make money, to acquire wealth and status, otherwise you're not good enough. To quote Karl Marx in one of his more anarchistic moments, "Within the capitalist system, all methods for raising the social productiveness of labour are brought about at the cost of the individual labourer. All means for the development of production transform themselves into means of domination over and exploitation of the producers. They mutilate the labourer into a fragment of a man, degrade him to the level of an appendage of a machine, destroy every remnant of charm in his work, and turn it into a hated toil. They estrange from him the intellectual potentialities of the labour process in the same proportion as science is incorporated in it as an independent power. They distort the conditions under which he works, subject him during the labour process to a despotism the more hateful for its meanness. They transform his lifetime into working time, and drag his wife and child beneath the wheels of the juggernaut of capital." What he's saying here is that even work which has the potential to be fun, exciting and stimulating has all of these qualities sucked out of it because our workplaces are organised in the interests of an elite minority. And as children, we go to school not to be stimulated or challenged, but simply to prepare us for our impending subordination to capital. Just think of all the fantastically talented people whose potential will remain unrealised because they have to spend their lives being mercilessly crushed in this manner. Is it any wonder that rates of depression, OCD, panic disorder, psychosis, alcohol and drug dependence have greater prevalence among more economically disenfranchised groups? Is it any wonder that, as Thatcherism plunged millions into deeper poverty in the 80s, heroin addiction spiralled in Muirhouse, resulting in a humanitarian crisis in which Edinburgh became the AIDS capital of Europe? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. All throughout the 20th century, there have been US-backed client states in which multinational corporations have bought up the country's assets and laid waste to the healthcare system. In many cases, there are simply no mental health services whatsoever. If someone has a psychotic episode, the procedure is to simply chain them to a bed. All across the world, millions of people, mainly working class people, suffer from mental illnesses and do not get the treatment they deserve. What could be more cruel, twisted, and profoundly anti-human than a system which needlessly makes life miserable by condemning millions to drudgery under the whip of authority? But despite the fact that capitalist totalitarianism seems to invade and exert control over so many aspects of our lives, there are still pockets of time where we are able to direct our own activities, and in these spaces our mental health flourishes. Being able to focus our attention on fun activities where we aren't being constantly assessed by an authority figure has a positive impact on our well-being. Learning a musical instrument, drawing, painting, cycling, writing, scrapbooking. Studies have shown that these kind of self-directed activities help us to relieve stress and fight depression. Few things in life are more pleasurable than being so profoundly engrossed and fascinated by an activity that you forget about your worries. We do these things not for authority, but for ourselves, because they are enjoyable, they give us a sense of accomplishment, and they are a break from the misery and stress of capitalist domination. Expanding these spheres of autonomous, self-directed activity into the workplace, the home environment, and the community as a whole, and bringing about a society which doesn't just treat people as isolated instruments of profit would clearly have enormous psychological benefits. It would help us so much just to know that we're part of a community and that no matter what happens, there will be people looking out for us. Anarchists advocate workers' self-management and collective ownership not just out of political preference for the idea, but because these forms of organisation do a fundamentally better job of meeting our psychological needs. When we engage in fruitful, self-directed activity and when we forge relationships of equality and solidarity with our friends, we thrive. We thrive on freedom and mutual support. Truly, we are at our best and healthiest when we're able to act in an anarchistic manner. And so, far from being a far-fetched pipe dream that human beings could never live under, anarchy is what keeps us sane in a profoundly insane world. I'm Libertarian Socialist Rants. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Well done, Jen. You're not being fired by me at this precise moment.